Hello and welcome to UMD News Analysis. I am Shimels Gebremichael. In this edition, we'll focus on an article appeared at the New York Times entitled, "Biden Must Ensure Ethiopia Does Not Return to War." We invite you all to stay with the program. Biden must ensure Ethiopia does not return to war. This is an analysis appeared on the New York Times on November the 10th, 2022. The piece was written by Dr. Comfort Iro, the president and CEO of the International Crisis Group. UMD Media will present to you in a manner that suits its viewers and listeners. This is UMD Media News Analysis. Stay tuned. The writer starts his piece by bringing the background of the war in Tigray and what the people believe about the peace deal and other developments occurring right now. It then provides advices and recommendations to the international community in general and mainly to the U.S. President Joe Biden. The writer sets a ground by stating what has happened over the last 2 years and what's going on following the ongoing peace deal between the Tigray People's Liberation Front TPLF and the government of Ethiopia. 2 years into the pitiless war ravaging northern Ethiopia, on November the 2nd, the Ethiopian government and the leaders of the northern Tigray region agreed to stop fighting after talks convened by the African Union in Pretoria, South Africa. According to Dr. Iro, the deal is a significant first step towards peace, but the ceasefire could quickly fall apart without sustained attention from American, African, and other world leaders. It is arguably right now the world's conflict. Fighting, starvation, and lack of access to health care in Tigray are estimated to have killed as many as 500,000 people in 2 years and rendered millions homeless. The analysis kept on elaborating that the Ethiopian government placed Tigray under siege during the war, and experts from the United Nations concluded that it may amount to the war crime of weaponizing starvation. The most recent phase of fighting in Tigray, which started after a truce ended in late August, has sucked in more than 500,000 combatants, according to International Crisis Group's estimates. Starting in 2014, Ethiopia was roiled by several waves of intense protests in two larger regions, Oromia and Amhara. Demonstrators demanded a more representative government after nearly 3 decades of authoritarian dominance, according to this writer, by a coalition helmed by Tigray's political elite, the article explains. In 2018, Ethiopia's governing coalition chose Abiy Ahmed, who was born to a Muslim Oromo father and an Amhara Orthodox Christian mother and is a Pentecostal Christian, as its leader and elected him prime minister. He promised to democratize and liberalize and raise hopes of building on Ethiopia's decades of economic growth and relative stability. After ending a 20-year freeze in relations with neighboring Eritrea that followed a 2-year war, he received the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize. Ethiopia was full of hope, but tension with Tigray escalated after Abiy Ahmed sidelined the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which had dominated the ruling coalition. And then war broke out towards the end of 2020. Prime Minister Abiy teamed up with his newly ally, President Isaias Afeweki of Eritrea, who remains embittered by the war with Ethiopia, which was then led by Tigrayans. Mr. Isaias has pushed much of his country's military might into the war. At the same time, security forces and militias from Amhara used the conflict to violently seize territory in western Tigray. The truce signed in South Africa is largely on the term of Abiy's government. The TPLF has agreed to allow the Ethiopian federal government back into Mekelle and to cede control of its highways and airports. The Tigrayans also agreed to disarm their forces within 30 days, a tough deadline to meet even if the political will existed. The Ethiopian government has pledged to allow unhindered aid to Tigray, to restore telecommunications and electricity in Tigray, and to secure Ethiopia's borders against foreign incursions, a possible promise that Eritrean forces would withdraw. As Prime Minister Abiy and his supporters declare victory, the TPLF leaders in Mekelle has remained tight-lipped about the truce its delegation signed. The TPLF could face internal dissent and drag its feet to undermine the accord. Abiy's government may feel little pressure to meet the Tigrayan leadership halfway as talks continue on. Outstanding security and political details is likely to remain poised to restart its offensive if it perceives that the TPLF is not keeping to the deal. If fighting resumes, the battlefield carnage will again be horrific. Eritrea's involvement in the conflict has been especially problematic. Few leaders have shown more ruthless disregard for human rights or impervious to international census than Mr. Isaias, and disturbing reports have emerged of Eritrean abuses. Eritrea was not a party to the new agreement and has declined to publicly back the truce. The TPLF is likely to demand Eritrea's withdrawal before disarming, which could derail the accord in its infancy. If the truce falls apart and the Ethiopian and Eritrean forces pursue the TPLF forces into rural areas where the bulk of the population is likely to seek refuge, there is reason to fear that civilians will again be targeted. The war has been fought in dense fog. The Ethiopian government has mostly barred journalists from covering the war and cut off Tigray's access to the internet for the past 2 years. World leaders need to pay more attention. At the U.S. Security Council, China and Russia have opposed any action, and the Security Council's African members have seemed wary of allowing the body to meddle in Ethiopia's affairs. China has been Ethiopia's biggest trading partner and a major source of infrastructure loans for the past decade. Yet, despite years of uneven attention to the region, Washington still has significant leverage. Ethiopia is heavily indebted to China and desperately needs an infusion of hard currency from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, where the United States wields substantial influence. The African Union faces difficulties of its own because its headquarters sit awkwardly in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital, which has made Tigray's leaders question its objectivity. Despite the challenge, the formal peace talks in South Africa materialized after months of difficult diplomatic efforts, including secret talks between the Ethiopian government and the TPLF, facilitated by Washington. African, American, and other world leaders need to sustain high-level pressure on Abiy Ahmed and the Tigrayan leaders to ensure the truce holds. Coordinated diplomacy, high-level engagement from African leaders, and Washington's combination of offering financial incentive and threatening punitive measures have proved effective in pushing the warring sides towards the path of peace. They need to double down on it. To ensure the truce holds, the African Union must quickly staff up to monitor the implementation of the deal and press the Ethiopian government and the TPLF to stick to their obligations and deadlines. Mr. Abiy must ensure Eritrea withdraws its troops and must act with magnanimity towards his Tigrayan foes should the TPLF meet its side of the bargain. President Biden should call Mr. Abiy emphasize American support for the implementation of the deal and urge a conciliatory approach toward his opponents. Mr. Biden should make it clear to Mr. Abiy that the United States will not support new financing from the World Bank and International Monetary Fund until aid is allowed unhindered into Tigray and the situation on the ground markedly improves. In this moment of reprieve, Ethiopia remains at risk of slipping through the cracks of our battered world order, the writer concludes. Thanking the writer and the New York Times, we also wrap up our program for today. This has been UMD News Analysis with me, Shimels Gebremichael, coming to you via Horn Broadcasting Services, HBS, through satellite and different social media outlets. Thank you for watching and have a good one.